Welcome to our study this week of Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. My name is Scott Rainey. I serve with the Church of the Nazarene in the area of Sunday School and Discipleship Ministries International, or SDMI. This adult Sunday school video lesson is provided in collaboration between the Foundry Publishing, formerly Nazarene Publishing House, and SDMI. The Sunday school lesson is intended to support the local church's efforts to make disciples who make disciples. Please feel free to use this video in any way that helps your church and its families. Have you ever been picked second? I am sure that you have for something. As I reflect today on that question, I realize that being picked second is really the story of my life. Whether it was in sports, education, or ministry, I have always been the second one chosen, but the first to respond. In some of my personal stories that I won't take time to detail here, someone else was chosen before me in some activity. When they failed to respond to the specific request, I was called second, and I said yes. Today, we will look at a parable of Jesus where the first invited guests failed to respond, leaving the door open to a whole new group of invitees. Several of Matthew's parables, including the parable in our lesson for this week, emphasize the theme of judgment. These judgment parables relate stories about an authority figure, a judge, a landowner, or a king, who had behaved generously toward his subordinates. Unfortunately, the subordinates never respond appropriately to their superior, and they fall under judgment. Our passage today records the third parable in a row in Matthew's gospel that portrays the religious leaders of Jesus' day in bad light. It was the story of a king, his friends, and a wedding banquet with some surprised guests. It's found in Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. Matthew 22, verses 1 through 14. It says, Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, 'Tell those who've been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fatted cattle have been butchered and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find.' So the servants went out into the street and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He asked, 'How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?' The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, 'Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen.'" Our passage begins in verse 1 with the words, "Jesus spoke to them." The Greek word translated spoke here in the New International Version actually means answered. A more direct translation would be, Jesus answered them again in parables, saying, the them of the story are the religious leaders, the chief priests and the Pharisees, who were seeking to arrest and ultimately kill Jesus. What question from these leaders was Jesus answering? Maybe they were the questions found in Matthew chapter 21, verse 23, where the chief priests and elders of the people asked Jesus, "By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority?" Maybe Jesus was answering their attempts and desire to see him arrested and killed as revealed in Matthew chapter 21, verse 46. Either way, Jesus responded to their questions or actions through a judgment parable. Jesus' teaching, once again, is on the kingdom of heaven. His parable described a wedding banquet prepared by the king for his son's wedding. It was common in first century Israel for a wedding to include a large banquet for friends, oftentimes lasting for a week. This is still common in modern day Palestine. Imagine with me for a moment the special banquet that would be prepared for the prince's wedding, and the honor it would be to receive an invitation from the king. The people had already been invited to the banquet. This was not a spur of the moment, come as you are party. They had been invited in advance. The king instructed his servants at the banquet to go out and to let the invited guests know that the time for the banquet was now. Come, the banquet is ready. To our surprise, as the readers of this story, Matthew 22, verse 3 says, "But they refused to come." The Greek can be translated, "They did not want to come." Surprisingly, the invited guests simply ignored the invitation. They were unannounced no-shows. The king was expecting guests, but he found himself standing in an empty banquet hall. Can you imagine? Alone and humiliated, the king instructed his servants to go back to those who had been invited and remind them that the king had slaughtered his best animals in preparation for this banquet, according to verse 4. This second invitation had a sense of urgency in the king's words. The dinner has been prepared. The menu has not only been planned, every detail associated with the menu has been cared for. No other detail remains unaddressed. This time, the words are given as a command from the king. Come, and come now. Verses 5 and 6 give a variety of responses to this second, more urgent invitation from the king. Most people simply ignored the invitation a second time. One went to his field, another to his business. Ignoring the command of the king, they simply went about their normal schedules. They had little to no interest in the king, in his son, or in a wedding banquet. Verse 6 says that some of the guests that were invited seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. Not all reactions to the second invitation were violent, but all rejected the king's request to come. Knowing that this parable serves as an allegory of types, we cannot help but think of the many different kinds of responses given to God's invitation to a restored relationship with him today. While some actively work to destroy the things of God in violent ways, many people simply ignore his invitation. They're too busy to consider or uninterested in knowing or following their Creator. What is in store for such measured responses of indifference or hatred? As we return to the parable, we find the king's expected anger. The resulting destruction fell on the entire city. It's important for us to acknowledge that the same punishment fell on the ungrateful guests that fell on the rebellious and violent guests. Their city was burned. Human wisdom might say that the king's response to the actions of those who killed his servants was warranted, but it may seem strong to you and to me that the same punishment would also come to the disinterested. The prophet Isaiah, however, provides this wisdom in Isaiah 64, verse 6. He said, all of us have become like one who is unclean, and all our righteous acts are like filthy rags. We all shrivel up like a leaf, and like the wind, our sins sweep us away. Again, bringing this allegory to life today, some might think that they're doing okay compared to others who behave much worse than they do. We are all tempted to think, well, at least I'm not as bad as so-and-so, that person. Such thinking allows us to avoid seriously looking at our own sin. The theme of getting or not getting what one deserves in verse 8 is prominent in Matthew's gospel. No one deserves the grace of God. People are invited into the kingdom by grace and grace alone. All people, Jews and Gentiles alike, are invited into the kingdom. As we are about to see, as God's servants, we're called to invite anyone we find into the kingdom. There is no deserving of such an invitation, whether by birth or wealth or good living. All are invited. You and I are instructed to simply go into the streets and make the invitation. The king is in no mood to put the wedding banquet on hold for his son. The rejection of those on the original guest list has caused the king to seemingly move to plan B. If the original invitees wish to reject the unencumbered invitation to the wedding banquet of the son of the ruler, then the king will make a new guest list. The thought of scrapping the original guest list for a new list of, well, anyone is quite astonishing. The king, however, makes no distinctions concerning the qualifications of the new list of invitees. They can be pillars of society or down and outers. His servants are to invite anyone and everyone they meet. Verse 10 says that the servants gathered the bad as well as the good. Obviously, the bad did not deserve the invitation, but neither did the good. Not even the original invitees deserved the invitation. The invitation was and is by the grace of the King of Kings. The special day in the parable finally arrives, the wedding banquet for the king's son. How would you dress if you were invited to the wedding of the son of the President of the United States? I doubt any of us would wear jeans to such an occasion at the White House. In antiquity, as today, people were expected to dress up for wedding banquets. Maybe an expected twist to the storyline happens in verse 11. One of the people invited from the street did not come to the banquet wearing wedding clothes. When the king saw him, he asked him, "How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?" Verse 12. The man was unable to answer. The king had the man bound and thrown outside, quote, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Verse 13. On the surface, one might say, well, what did the king expect if he had invited everyone? It would be good for us to pause here and ask, when all the people invited from the street came, why did this one not have wedding clothes on? Implied in the story is the reality that when the servants were gathering all the people they could find, they were also providing them everything they needed to attend the banquet. None would be embarrassed by the clothing or apparel that he or she was wearing. They were given proper attire for admittance and participation to the grand event of the wedding banquet. The Apostle John recorded the event of such a banquet in Revelation 19, verses 6 through 9. Listen to this. Then I heard what sounded like a great multitude, like the roar of rushing waters, and like loud peals of thunder, shouting, "Hallelujah, for the Lord God Almighty reigns. Let us rejoice and be glad and give him glory, for the wedding of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Fine linen, bright and clean, was given her to wear. Fine linen stands for the righteous acts of God's holy people. Then the angel said to me, write this, blessed are those who are invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb. And he added, these are the true words of God. The kingdom of heaven was and is all about God's incredible grace. God's invitation to the wedding banquet in the kingdom was not dependent on anything or any claim guests could make. These guests from the unexpected quarters of the city would be given the attire that would both welcome them and identify them as guests of the king. The one who was not dressed appropriately failed to respect and appreciate the invitation by wearing clothes that fit the occasion. The unworthy guest had behaved as if the invitation did not matter, that it was not worthy of his deepest gratitude. Again, it's implied that he had been offered the clothes to wear, but had rejected them. The Apostle Paul warns of such behavior in Romans 2, verse 13, where he said, for it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. Here we find the reality that God gives the invitation and makes our transformation possible. Isaiah 61 verse 10 says, I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness, as a bridegroom adorns his head like a priest, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. We need to understand that we are saved by God's grace and made holy by God's grace. It is by grace from first to last. At the same time, we must participate with his invitation by putting on the clothes we are offered to wear. Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 and verse 14 says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. Romans chapter 13, verse 14 says, clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ. In the end, here's what we know. Because of our sin, no one deserves the invitation to know God and live with him forever. But God, in his love and grace, has invited everyone and provided all you and I need for salvation. We must receive his invitation and his grace that transforms us from the inside out so that we are clothed in Jesus Christ. And when that day of the wedding supper of the Lamb arrives, those who are ready and watching, wearing the clothes he has provided, will be ushered into that special meal. Between now and then, God's children are called to go into the streets and invite everyone to come to the table. We don't decide which ones are worthy and which are not. We simply invite everyone and allow the transforming work of the Spirit of God to make the invited guests ready for the banquet meal. Have you accepted the King's invitation? Are you wearing wedding clothes provided by God? Are you spending your days and nights in the street inviting others to come to the wedding banquet? The banquet, my friend, is soon. The call is urgent. It's time to respond.